21 years ago last month, a man in a black turtleneck walked out on a stage and he introduced something that was completely groundbreaking at the time. October 23rd, 2001 was the day that the world was introduced to the Apple iPod. The idea of the Apple iPod at that time was that you could have 1,000 songs in your pocket. And that was a huge deal back then. You might not have an iPod now. I mean, they discontinued. They don't make them anymore. It's kind of the precursor to the iPhone, and the smartphones have replaced it. But that changed the way that we listen to music forever. Now, we still have tapes, and maybe you have some 8 tracks, or maybe your grandparents do, or you have some vinyl, or just different things like that. But the idea of having digital music available on a device in your pocket took off like it never had to that point, all because of the Apple iPod. Now, one of the cool things that the Apple iPod could do, and many things after it, was you could create a personal playlist. And a playlist was just a list of songs that became kind of a soundtrack for whatever you were doing at the time, for whatever you created it. Maybe you'd have a workout playlist, and so when you're working out, you would play this. Maybe you had a road trip playlist, so when you went on road trips. I mean, if you're clueless on what I'm talking about, probably in your day, if you did mixtapes, it was kind of the same thing. Do you remember those? You'd record from one tape to the other, or maybe you had a reel-to-reel. I don't know what you used in your day, but it's just one of those things where you'd mix songs together. But the iPod had that idea of an electronic playlist, and you'd have things like an in love playlist. Oh, I'm so in love, here's all these love songs. Then you'd have the inevitable breakup playlist that you'd play when you broke up, and it would help you through that. Maybe you had a relaxing playlist, and you play it after a long day and it just help you relax. The point was you were in control to express yourself, your mood, or your activity with the collections of songs that you put together. Now, you could do that before the iPod on a computer, but never was it so easy and so portable as it was with the iPod. Now, as fun as it is for me to think about the technology that's now over 20 years old, it got me thinking about the power of song to express our thoughts and our feelings, right? Sometimes we don't know how to say something, and there's a song that just nails it on the head or comes pretty close. And how a playlist often will give us a consistent theme to whatever we're experiencing. And so that left me with thinking about what are consistent themes that we find in life that are consistent for the human experience. Like, what are the feelings and circumstances that are so often repeated that we hear them time and again from generation to the next? One of the themes that I believe that we hear time and again is heartbreak. Heartbreak from relationships, heartbreak from disappointments, heartbreak from just life and the way that it happens, and our constant search for good in the world because heartbreak has us just feeling down. We want to hope that the heartbreak isn't how it's going to be forever, and so often we're looking for hope in the midst of this. And so it's funny because songs, I think we find this soundtrack all over the place, but here's a sampling of a few that we have. You promised the world and I fell for it. I put you first and you adored it. Set fires to my forest and you let it burn. Sang off key in my chorus because it wasn't yours. Lose you to love me, 2019. Tell me something, girl. Are you happy in this modern world? Or do you need more? Is there something else you're searching for? From Shallow, 2018. You're saying, oh, that's pretty recent. Well, let's go back. I dug my key into the side of his pretty little souped-up four-wheel drive, carved my name into his leather seats. I took a Louisville Slugger to both headlights. I slashed a hole in all 4 tires. Maybe next time he'll think before he cheats. Heartbreak, right? I've climbed the highest mountains. I've run through the fields only to be with you. But I still haven't found what I'm looking for. That's U2 from 1987. And then we get one that's just plain and simple. I can't get no satisfaction because I try and I try and I try and I try. Some of you, I only went back to 1965, and that list is hardly expansive. It hardly includes them all. But I think it speaks gives a testimony to the fact that heartbreak and a deficit of good are common in this human experience. We all go through it in some levels. So what is the answer to this heartbreak? Is there a reason to hope for goodness amidst all of this heartbreak? Does God have anything to say about this? Now, today we're going to be in the Old Testament in 2 Samuel chapter 9 as we look to kind of answer this question from one direction. Because while many people will tell you that just do what makes you happy, what many of us have found through trial and error is that we aren't entirely sure what will do the trick. We've tried different things, and we would echo that song, I can't get no satisfaction. So let's stick a pin in that idea as we turn to 2 Samuel chapter 9. I welcome you to turn in your Bibles if you have one there, or the words will be on the screen, or if you have a device, probably more than an iPod, but if you have something, a device with the Bible app, you can look there as well. But 2 Samuel chapter 9, we begin in the first verse. One day David asked, is anyone in Saul's family still alive? Anyone to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? He summoned a man named Ziba who had been one of Saul's servants. The king then asked him, is anyone still alive from Saul's family? If so, I want to show God's kindness to them. Ziba replied, yes, one of Jonathan's sons is still alive. He is crippled in both feet. So David sent for him and brought him to Merrick's home. His name was Mephibosheth. That's going to be a hard name to forget, and it's a hard name to say. And if you didn't have a lisp when you started reading it, you will feel like you have one afterward. But Mephibosheth, he was Jonathan's son, and he was Saul's grandson. When he came to David, he bowed low to the ground in deep respect. David said, greetings, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth, I'm going to get it right. I'm committed to it. Mephibosheth replied, I am your servant. Just a little explanation of what's going on in this passage is David is now king, and if you know the story of King David at all, you know it was many years after the fact that he was pronounced that he was going to be the next king, actually anointed to be the next king, but he had to wait patiently at times, or maybe impatiently, hiding in caves as he was chased and all that kind of stuff. But after many, many years, he is now king. David was very loyal to Saul's son Jonathan, and he had vowed to take care of any family that survived after there was kind of well, I guess that's a nice way to say it, a cleansing, but basically any opposition that came up against David's kingdom and his authority, they basically wiped out. But he said he had a vow to Jonathan that he would take care of any family that was left once he assumed the throne. Now, it was a customary in those times to kill off all the relatives of a former ruler because they may cause an uprising. Because you know how that is. If there's someone and they might have a claim to the throne, there might be people that say, hey, we don't like the current king. Yeah, you should be the king. You're the rightful heir of that. And so it was customary at that time to kill off all the relatives. And so when David sends for Mephibosheth, even though David said he wanted to show kindness, Mephibosheth would certainly be scared for his life. And on top of that, the reality of Mephibosheth's physical issues made him viewed as less than in a society that didn't value people that had physical ailments. And so when Mephibosheth comes into David's presence, he comes with nothing to offer David. He didn't offer him anything socially, he didn't offer him anything politically, and he didn't offer him anything physically. There was nothing he could do for David in any kind of situation. And so you have to imagine that he was pretty nervous going into this presence because he had nothing to give. Jump down into verse 7, and here's what we read. Don't be afraid, David said. I intend to show kindness to you because of my promise to your father, Jonathan. I will give you all the property that once belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will eat here with me at the king's table. Mephibosheth bowed respectfully and exclaimed, who is your servant that you should show such kindness to a dead dog like me? Yikes. Interesting way to describe himself, but David doesn't have something sinister in mind. We find out in that part of the passage. He doesn't have something sinister in mind for Mephibosheth. Instead, he gives him his family property and an insistence that he eat at the king's table. David has taken someone who can offer him absolutely nothing and brought him to his personal table, offering reconciliation between families and in the kingdom. Not because Mephibosheth deserved it, not because Mephibosheth even asked, but because David was loyal to his friend Jonathan and he was committed to share God's kindness with his family. Now, you can imagine that Mephibosheth's life changed completely in just a matter of a few hours. He went from heartache to now having a full heart. He went from isolation and being alone to being brought near to the king and to his family. Mephibosheth had no hope for those things before King David called for him. But now Mephibosheth was restored to the status he was originally born into. He was born as the grandson of the king, and so he would have had privilege. And that had been taken away, but now it was restored. Mephibosheth was restored to the kingdom and to this new king. Verse 11 says this, and from that day on, Mephibosheth ate regularly at David's table like one of the king's own sons. One of the king's own sons. He didn't view him as someone different. Instead, he treated him just like he would his own son. And that is huge. David didn't just say, hey, you know what, Mephibosheth? I'm going to give you just this acre on the corner of my lot. He didn't say, you know what, here's a house on the edge of my kingdom. Yeah, you can come in, but I'm going to give you the worst of the worst. He doesn't do any of that. He gives him the best of the best and invites him right to his table. He invites him to the palace. He invites him into his presence. He said, I'm going to eat with you. I'm not going to be in the other room and say, like, I don't want to be bothered with that guy because he reminds me of someone who tried to kill me. Instead, he says, come to my table and be like one of my sons. David reconciled Mephibosheth, bringing peace, and he paved the way for a feeling of acceptance for Mephibosheth. He didn't wait for Mephibosheth to jump through certain hoops. He didn't say, hey, go and do these things to prove to me your loyalty. Instead, David was the one that was proactive, even though he might have had reason to kill him. You might be thinking, well, that's really cool for Mephibosheth, but what does that have to do with me? And I want to tell you, if you don't already know, that the story of King David and Mephibosheth is the same story of King Jesus and what he offers to write about you and me. We have lived lives that have followed another king, and so we are rebels against the true King Jesus. And even if we aren't crippled in our feet, we are spiritually broken by the fall due to sin. So not only are we experiencing the pain and the heartbreak of life that is other than what we were originally created for, thanks to sin, but we have nothing in and by ourselves that we are able to make things better. That's just the reality of our status. Is that we are just like Mephibosheth. Because of sin, we are separated from the king. Because of sin, we are outside of that. Because of sin, we are unable to do it ourselves. But the word says, but God, rich in his mercy, sent his son Jesus to rescue us. And so it's by King Jesus we are reconciled. It's by King Jesus we are restored to God. It's by King Jesus we are forgiven. It's by King Jesus we are accepted. And it's by King Jesus we are invited into his presence and to sit at his table. And it's by Jesus we are carried to the table of the King of Kings as sons and as daughters of the Most High God who created the whole universe. And so he doesn't just say, okay, I'll let you in, but you got to sit over here. No, he picks us up and carries us right to his table and says, come and dine with me. So when we roll out the red carpet to our neighbors, we do it in the same way that Jesus and David did. We serve people sharing what we have, not simply the leftovers or what's easy. Instead, we bring them into our presence when we host people, when we are hospitable. And we give them the best as if they were friends and family, as if they were flesh and blood. Do you have people in your life that aren't actually blood relatives but treat you like they are? Have you ever met somebody like that? I mean, you wouldn't know, someone looking from the outside, you wouldn't know they weren't related because, man, they treat them just as good as their flesh and blood. Isn't it funny that King David invited Mephibosheth to his table and Christ invites us to his table too? When we participate in the idea of communion, it's representative of what he is inviting us to. Look at this idea of the Last Supper. Don't dismiss the idea of sitting around a table and sharing a meal as not that important. New Testament scholar N.T. Wright says this. He says, when Jesus himself wanted to explain to his disciples what his forthcoming death was all about, he didn't give them a theory, he gave them a meal. He said, "This is my body. This is my blood." And they shared in a meal. Max Lucado, the Christian author, says this: "Something holy happens around a dinner table that will never happen in a sanctuary. In a church auditorium, you see the backs of heads. But around a table, you see the expressions on faces. Church services are on the clock. Around the table, there's time to talk. When you open your door to someone, you are sending this message: you matter to me and to God. You may think you're saying come over for a visit, but what your guest hears is, I am worth that effort." You ever thought about that? After a couple years of being told to stay indoors, stay inside, to keep your distance, because what someone might infect you with, it might be good to be reminded of the Jesus way of living, where you invite people to your table. It's a profound invitation for people to come as they are and meet you as you are, broken pieces and all, that you don't have to clean up before you come to the table, but you come to the table and we hope to share with one another's lives. It takes vulnerability to share space, doesn't it? To invite people into your life, to invite people into your house. Sometimes we're like, "Oh, don't go in that closet." My favorite is the people you go over their house and they're saying, "Oh, excuse the mess." And you're looking around like, "Mess? This looks like a museum. You have to come over to my house and see mess." No. But it's powerful when we invite people and just say, "Here it is. This is my life. This is real life." And we share that with one another. There's something real to being at the table with no filters, no restricted access, just acceptance. And saying, "Come and partake what I'm taking in." And ultimately, we do this as Christ followers because our King has done this with us. And we partner with him in doing this with the world around us. Paul writes about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. I don't have it in my notes. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. As I turn there, I didn't have my thing there. All right. Here's what we read, starting with the 16th verse in chapter 5. "So we have stopped evaluating others from a human point of view." Jump down to verse 18. "And all of this is a gift from God, who brought us back to himself through Christ. And God has given us this task of reconciling people to him. For God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, no longer counting people's sins against them. And he gave us this wonderful message of reconciliation. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, 'Come back to God.'" What's Paul saying? We don't need to evaluate people from a human point of view. Anybody else struggle not doing that? You're going to leave me up here by myself? Am I the only person that ever does that? Sometimes we look at people and we see their circumstances and be like, "Oh, I don't know about that," or "That's kind of odd," or maybe that'd be uncomfortable to be around, or maybe we just evaluate, we look at certain things from our point of view, and we only know so much, and we think like, maybe that wasn't the best decision. And so, I know none of you saints do that, but I'm probably talking to people online or in another church. But I'm just saying that sometimes we evaluate people from our point of view without knowing the whole story. We see somebody with a sign, and we have a thought about what their story is, and we fill it in sometimes. Or I'll just say I, since nobody else here does that. But sometimes I fill in that backstory of what their story might have been. But Paul says, if we are like Christ, we don't do that. We no longer view people, we no longer evaluate from our point of view. Instead, we view them through God's point of view, who so loved them that he sent his son Jesus so that they, like us, will be accepted, reconciled, and adopted into the family of God. And that's the good news about Jesus. That's the good news about life. And that's the good news that you and I have been given to invite others into, is this message of reconciliation. Whew, that's tough, isn't it? I mean, we just had an election on Tuesday, and I got to stand in the lobby. That's another thing we didn't talk. Your church hosted it was a polling location. There are a lot of interesting people that come to vote. Anyway, but one of those things is like you get to hear that. You go into an election line and tell people we're here to give reconciliation, because that's usually not what people are there to vote for. Again, probably not you, other people, but I think too many times we get caught thinking we are called to be the message of showing people why we're right and why they're wrong, to share a message of judgment, to say it's coming on you, or the message of why I'm better than them, or at least I'm not them. Have you ever said that or thought that or heard that? You probably just heard it from other people, but sometimes we say, well, at least I'm not like them. Whoever them are. Them is there an English teacher? I don't know. Them. But at least we're not like them is what we say. But if we have been carried spiritually to the king's table like Mephibosheth before us, then how can we claim anything but unmerited grace as the reason why? We are earthly hosts for the blessing of the presence of God, for the purpose of serving and glorifying Him by way of inviting others to our tables and treating them like one of the family. And so when they come in, and we're so glad to see them, and they have muddy shoes, we don't say, hey, get out, you got your carpet dirty. We say, don't worry about it, I'll get that. I'm just so glad you're here. They come in, and maybe they don't say the right words, and we're like, woo, didn't expect them to say that, but you know what? You're a guest, and you're going to have strange ideas. I don't expect you to act like me, I expect you to act like yourself, and you're going to be accepted here. When we do this, we are responding to the soundtrack and the playlist that says there is only heartache by saying there is hope. And that hope is Jesus Christ. When we allow others to be themselves, accepting them not because they are perfect, but because they are God's creation, then we are following Jesus. Think about that. We went through this series, The Chosen, and it was Jesus calling his disciples, and he said, come and follow me. He didn't give them a written test and said, name all the books of the Bible. He didn't say, show me how much knowledge you have. He didn't say, show me any of this. He said, come and follow me. And it's interesting that he didn't pick the Pharisees who knew all the law, that knew what was right and knew what was wrong. He picked people that knew they needed somebody to help them. Accepting someone's worth of dignity and love is not the same as approving their decisions. So both things can be true. Sometimes we think if I invite them over, then they might think I'm approving of their decisions. No, you don't have to do that. You also don't have to sit there and tell them all the things you disapprove with. Let me tell you, that's usually not a very good way to get people to come and enjoy your house. Or maybe I'm speaking for myself. I usually don't love to go and hear all the things I'm doing wrong. I don't usually need help with that. I usually know. I need help sometimes, though, so feel free to keep telling me, or to tell me. I should say keep telling me. That sounds bad. No one's been telling me, not that I'm not married to, that doesn't live in my house. No, I'm joking, sorry. But the idea is that just because you have somebody over for a dinner, you can show them love, doesn't mean that you're saying, I agree with every decision you've made in your life. I don't even agree with the decisions I made 5 years ago. But when we make space for people and we invite them into our homes and our lives, we demonstrate the hope we have for good. There is an alternative theme for life that isn't echoed in the playlist of the culture, and that is the story of hope. That hope isn't a feeling or a place or a thing. That hope is a person, and that person is Jesus Christ. He is our hope for good. Part of hospitality is sharing that truth. Sometimes sharing that truth and just by having people over, sometimes it's sharing that truth. Part of that can be like, you ever been treated so good that you say, why are you doing this? And someone gets to say, I'm doing this because Jesus has done this for me. Do you live like that's the truth, that our hope is in Jesus? Do you live in the reconciliation that he leads with? Because sometimes we need reminded, sometimes I need reminded that Jesus came with a message of reconciliation between God and reconciliation with one another, all by the grace of God through his Son, Jesus Christ. And so do we allow reconciliation to lead us into places we would probably never go? Speaking to people we might not choose to be with. Inviting people into our family because they're in God's family. Do you share in the reconciliation Jesus provided through his death? Do you bring people to the table who have no hope of getting there any other way? When was the last time we did something for someone and didn't say, well, what do we get out of it? I'll tell you, one of the great things about being at this church is I have never heard someone say, man, we did Upward 10 years ago and there were so many people here, but we didn't get anything out of it. Because I've been to churches and they said, we did this program and we never got anything out of it, so we shut it down. We did this other thing and you know what? Nobody showed up on Sunday, so we shut it down. I have not heard that once said that way. And so I'm thankful. Because sometimes we like people that show up on Sunday out of a program and it makes us feel good about ourselves when that's not even what we're in it for. We exist for the blessing of other people and for the love of Jesus Christ to impact and change their life in a radical way, and that Jesus can carry them to the table and bring reconciliation to them. And if they come to church here on Sunday, then great. But if they go to another church down the street, then we still rejoice because the kingdom of God, another life is written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and we celebrate that. So our love isn't conditional on them showing up and giving something to us. Our love is for people because Jesus loves them. I believe God has uniquely positioned each of us, as well as this church and these facilities, to bring the message of reconciliation to those who don't currently live in that reality. God has people in your life, I guarantee it, that have shared that message with you. You probably wouldn't be sitting here today if someone hadn't been in your life that said, you should know about Jesus, you should know about God. We probably have at least one person, if not many people, that can say, I'm so thankful for that person. They told me about Jesus. In the same way, though, God has people in your life that are looking and searching for good news because all they hear is bad news, and all they have experienced is heartbreak and pain. They want to know that there's more to life than the pain and the brokenheartedness that they have experienced, that there is hope for something good. And so you can tell them about Jesus. And sometimes before you can tell them about Jesus, you have to walk with them for a while, that they teach them that you can trust them, allow them to learn that they can trust you. That they're not a project, they're not something for you to put a stat on and say, well, I talked to 5 people this week about Jesus, but you actually care about them and love them. And even if they never respond by saying, I gave my life to Jesus, you're still going to love them. I have some time, so I'm going to tell you a story. I used to work with somebody at a place a long time ago, nobody you know, is in Ohio, the land of milk and honey. And I worked at a place, and it was cubicles, and we took customer service calls. There's about, 300, 400 of us that worked in this cube farm, we called it. And there was one lady, and she was older, and she was sweet to a point. There's a lot of young people that work there. I was in college, and it was a way just to, had different hours you could work and paid pretty good. And anyway, this lady would go around, and there would be any new young lady she would take under her wing and teach them how to work. And inevitably, it was the same story with people, person after person. That she'd get to a point and she'd say, you need to know about Jesus. You need to give your life to God. And it was kind of a forced reaction. She'd say, will you do that? They'd say, well, I'm not ready for that, or no, or whatever. And she'd say, okay, we'll have fun burning in hell. And she would not talk to them anymore. That's not us. You say, whether you do it or not, we love you. You have children. They don't always listen to what you say. If they're my kids' age, they might never listen to what you say. But you don't stop loving them. Your love for them that keeps praying for them. It's your love for them that says, I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to be your friend. I'm going to be here just like Jesus is. And sometimes that's not easy because kids do stupid stuff, but so do adults. But we have a message of reconciliation, not of judgment. God says he'll judge. He's called us to love. And so I just encourage us that we roll out the red carpet, that we invite people in, and we love them, whether they act the way we want them to or not. We can probably start telling them about how we should probably start getting upset when they're not acting the way that we want them to, when we start acting all the way that we want to. So it doesn't make any sense now. It might make sense later, but Jesus meets you where you are. Doesn't wait for you to clean yourself up. He meets you where you are, and he carries you to his table. He hosts you at the king's table so you can host others at yours. The question is, do you need carried today? And so if you'll stand with me as we wrap up this message, I just want us to think about that. If we could bow our heads and close our eyes. I don't want to leave here without us maybe thinking about what's the playlist and the soundtrack to our life right now? Have we gotten distracted, and could we sing those songs that say, I can't find what I'm looking for, or I haven't found what I'm looking for, I can't find satisfaction? Are we caught up in, is that just kind of what we feel right now? Have we lost sight of the hope that we would have in Jesus Christ? Or maybe we've never had that hope in Jesus Christ. I don't know where you are today. You know and God knows. Nobody else knows. And so some of us, I imagine in a room this size, and even with it being online and that kind of stuff, there are somebody here today or within the sound of my voice that could say, you know what? I've never really allowed Jesus to carry me to his table. I've never really just surrendered to the idea that I need him, not just for my afterlife, but for all of my life. I need him for the hope that there is still good and that good is happening and that he is in control and that he is on the throne. And so if that's you here today, then I invite you to pray and say, God, I need you. God of love who sent your son Jesus Christ, will you come and will you meet me where I am, Lord? I can't do it myself. I'll never measure up, Lord. And even though sometimes I might look around and say, well, at least I'm not that person, Lord, ultimately I know that I want to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you and I, that we're good. And so, Jesus, if that requires me surrendering for you to carry me to your table, then will you do so today? And some of us would say, you know what? I was at the King's table. I've given my life to Christ, but over the last few days, weeks, months, maybe even years, I just took a few steps away. And I look up and I look around. I'm saying, man, where did that go? Like I'm just not where I wanted to be. If that's you this morning, then I invite you just to take that first right step back to him, because you're never too far gone that there's not that message of reconciliation to bring you back. And so you just say, sorry, Jesus, I didn't want to go that way. I don't know how I got here, but I want to go with you now. I want to, instead of going my own way and choosing for myself what is wrong and what is right, I surrender to your lordship of telling me, of directing me, of guiding me, of being in life together at your table through your son, Jesus Christ. And so, Lord, take me back. Or maybe you're someone today that says, Pastor, you know what? I know that I'm Mephibosheth. I know by the grace of God I've been carried to his table. I know that I feast at his table every day, and every day he's making me more like his son, Jesus Christ. And maybe your prayer would be, Lord, help me to offer that to other people. Remind me that I am yours and that your people are generous with what they have, and they invite others into their life. And so, God, maybe in that situation, maybe you'd pray, Jesus, help me to give tangible ways to that message of reconciliation with those that I meet. Help me have my antenna up and my eyes open for those who I might encounter this week. So whatever the case may be, wherever you find yourself in one of those situations or somewhere in between, Jesus is ready to have that message of reconciliation be in you and through you, lived out in tangible ways. And so I just encourage us together to seek him in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for